Most people assume that if you think negative thoughts, that's the problem. That's what leads to anxiety, depression, and emotional distress. But what if that's not actually true? What if the real issue isn't what you think, but how your attention interacts with those thoughts? Today, we're going to break down the role that attention plays in emotion, especially how it can pull us into things like anxiety and depression. Because according to the ideas I've been working through, thoughts themselves are just events in the mind. They come and go, and everyone has them. The difference between someone who stays mentally healthy and someone who spirals into anxiety or depression is not the presence of negative thoughts. It's how attention is deployed in response to them. By the way, make sure you're subscribed because I'll be continuing this series and connecting all of these pieces together. So the core idea is that attention is a regulator of emotion. Attention plays a central role in how we regulate our emotions, and it does this in two key ways. First, attention acts like a filter. It decides what's important enough to focus on in the first place. And out of everything happening around you and inside your mind, it selects certain things and says, this matters. Second, once something is selected, attention allows you to concentrate on it. It deepens processing. It keeps something active in your awareness long enough for it to have an emotional impact. But here's the constraint. Your attentional system has limited capacity. You can't process everything at once. So what gets selected and how long it stays selected really matters. And this is where emotional problems start to emerge. Intrusive thoughts are not the problem. It's perseveration. Everyone experiences intrusive thoughts, right? Random worries, negative images, doubts, they just show up. But psychological disorder is not caused by the thoughts themselves. It's caused by perseveration. And that's getting stuck in cycles of worry and rumination, right? It's prolonging it. So instead of a thought appearing and fading naturally, like many others do, attention locks onto it. It keeps returning to it. It processes it over and over again. So this sustained processing is what turns a passing thought into something emotionally significant. How anxiety and depression disrupt attention. When someone is anxious or depressed, their attention system becomes less efficient. So intrusive thoughts and ongoing worry, they consume mental resources. And when these resources are tied up, attention becomes biased and harder to control. For example, in anxiety, there's often a selective attention bias towards threat. This means the person is more likely to notice potential danger. And not only that, they interpret those situations as more threatening than they actually are, neutral situations. So anxiety doesn't just change what you see, it changes how you interpret what you see. And importantly, a lot of this happens automatically without awareness or intention. In depression, attention also becomes narrowed, but in a different way. It turns inwardly and fixes on the self. So instead of scanning for external threat, like in anxiety, attention is drawn toward negative, self-relevant thoughts, past failures, perceived shortcomings. So this inward bias reduces engagement with the external environment and reinforces rumination that maintains the state. Okay? So one of the most important pieces here is something called metacognitive beliefs. They're basically beliefs about your own thinking. And these beliefs drive how attention is used. For example, imagine someone worries that their partner is going to get into a car accident. The thought appears automatically. That's a trigger. But what happens next depends on their metacognitive beliefs. If they believe that worrying is useful, then the belief activates a whole chain of processes, right? Like their attention becomes biased toward monitoring for danger. They start recalling near past misses. They imagine worst case scenarios. They try to control the situation. They even try to regulate their emotions by forcing positive thinking. So one belief about thinking leads to an entire system of attention, memory, imagery, behavior, emotion regulation. So self-focused attention is a core pattern here, right? So a consistent finding is that self-focused attention is elevated across psychological disorders. This is when attention is directed inwards, right? Thoughts, feelings, and states, rather than outwards into the environment. So this inward focus tends to come with a specific style of thinking. That's when you prioritize worry or rumination, right? Scan for threats, engage in internal coping strategies, trying to control your thoughts. So this style of thinking keeps the system running, this maladaptive system, right? The feedback loop between your mind and your environment. So behavior doesn't just come from what's happening in your head. It's shaped by an ongoing interaction between you and the world around you. And when that interaction becomes dysfunctional, it reinforces the problem. So take social anxiety as an example, right? Someone believes others are judging them. That belief, supported by attention bias and negative interpretations. So what do? They avoid social situations. But by avoiding them, they never get the chance to disconfirm their beliefs. They don't have positive experiences that could challenge it. So these beliefs get stronger. The attention bias gets stronger. Then the cycle tightens. So let me tell you why changing thoughts isn't enough, right? It leads to an important implication. So if the problem were just specific beliefs, then changing those beliefs directly would solve it. But that's not enough. Because the real issue is the pattern, the way attention is deployed, the way information is processed, the way thoughts are sustained and interpreted. So the intervention has to target those underlying processes. Let's talk about verbal thinking and emotional persistence. So another interesting point is excessive verbal thinking, especially in worry. So when you process stress verbally, constantly talking it through in your mind, you may actually prevent the natural fading of emotional responses. Instead of emotions decaying on their own, they're kept alive through repeated cognitive processing. So the very act of trying to think your way out of distress can end up prolonging it. So let's talk about attentional control, right? So within this framework, it's crucial because it acts as a moderator, basically influencing how much these maladaptive cycles affect your symptoms, or symptoms in general. If you can control where attention goes, you're less likely to get pulled into worry and rumination. Makes sense. But if you can't, then those processes will run automatically and persist. But we have to be cautious about talking about automatic processes, right? So there's a tendency to explain psychological problems in terms of automatic unconscious processes. We have previous videos on that. But without strong evidence, we shouldn't assume that everything is driven by hidden automatic mechanisms. A lot of what's happening here involves patterns that, while they're outside of our conscious awareness, they're still part of a system that can be accessed and changed. So when you step back and look at all of this, a clear picture emerges. Emotional problems, disorders, they're not just about having irrational or negative beliefs about yourself, although that's a part of it. But they're about how attention locks onto certain thoughts, how those thoughts are processed, and how the processing feeds into behavior and interaction with the world. In other words, it's not just the content of your mind that matters, it's the system, it's the thinking style. So the takeaway here today is, it's not just that having negative thoughts creates problems, it's the way attention locks onto them and keeps them running. So if you want to follow the full series and see how all of this connects, make sure you subscribe and keep an eye out for the next video. Thanks.